the Municipal Demarcation Board processes. I need to thank the internal team that worked tirelessly to organize this briefing. You are welcome. Now for the order of proceedings. We have split the briefing into four critical sessions. After each session, we will pause and allow for a question and answer session and then continue to the next. The four sessions are, firstly, the mandate of the Municipal Demarcation Board, the criteria for decisions of the board, the ward delimitation process for the 2016 local government elections, and we will put the Malamulele issue in perspective. Following the conclusion of the discussions, we will have a networking session. I now have a duty to introduce the chairperson of the board, Ms. Jane Tupana. Jane started her career as a lecturer in geography and later served government in various executive positions within both the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, the then Land Affairs Department, and the Limpopo Department of Agriculture. She is a passionate researcher who contributes to the body of knowledge in the land and agricultural sector through local and international publications and conference papers. Jane holds 2 master's degrees, one in business leadership through the University of South Africa, and a master's in public administration from the University of Pretoria. Members of the press and our esteemed visitors, ladies and gentlemen, you have Ms. Jane Tupana. Over to you, Chairperson.
Thank you, CEO. Good morning, members of the press. I wish I knew your houses, the houses you're coming from. You refer to them as houses, media houses. But nonetheless, it had been indicated how much we value our partnership with yourselves, because there's no other way that we can deepen our democracy in this country unless we partner with you, given your experience and how you are able to reach out to citizenry at different levels. I will tackle the first part that Mr. Manjezi had indicated, and I'll pause just in case there would be questions that relate to the mandate of the board. The board, as you would know, is a constitutional institution whose mandate is informed by the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Chapter 7, specifically Section 155, as well as the Local Government Municipal Demarcation Act and the Local Government Municipal Structures Act. The board is a juristic person and is independent, carries out its functions without any fear, favor, or prejudice. The board has the responsibility to determine and redetermine municipal boundaries throughout the country, delimit wards, as well as conduct capacity assessments for municipalities in order to advise the MECs in case of possible distribution of functions or allocation of functions between the districts and local municipalities. The board has been in the forefront of spatial transformation in the country since its establishment in 1999 to defeat the apartheid spatial logic and bring about spatial justice. Since then, the board has managed to rationalize the total number of municipalities from 843 to 278 as of the current. And this process is led and guided by the criteria, principles, or factors that are embodied in Section 24 and 25 of the Municipal Demarcation Act. That is for the local municipalities, largely that are Category B, Category C, as well as Section B, Section 2 of the Municipal Structures Act, which largely indicates or would outline the criteria that are used to determine Category A municipalities, referred to commonly as metros. So that is just that in brief regarding the mandate of the board, and you'd realize that I kept on saying municipal boundaries, and that does not include provincial boundaries. I would pause here if there's any question.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions on the mandate of the Municipal Demarcation Board for clarification? Can you please identify yourself? Yes, please.
What I meant is, when the board was established in 1999, there were 843 municipalities in the country. And since then, those had been reduced from 843 to 278.
A question over there?
You Chair, MC to the Chair, I'd like to sort of like propose a way forward, because I see the Q&A, they come in between the 4 sessions that you have decided to tackle. But when I look at session 2, it might come back again to session 4. Why don't we allow the chair to run through, and at the end maybe we can allow us to sort of like take him back to either section 1 to clarity 1. That's a suggestion, MC.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. The reason we split the sessions into 4 sessions, it's because all sessions are linked to each other. So we wanted to put the whole function and the obligations of the Municipal Demarcation Board into perspective, and hopefully before coming to the most topical issue. Thank you. Can we then continue to the second session?
Okay, and I guess you realize these sessions are too small. They won't take too much of your time, just providing the background. I'm not sure if you have the fact sheets, because the second session would talk to largely the criteria, and I would just love you to read through those criteria and just browse through them so that you get to understand when we keep on saying the criteria set out in section 24 and 25, that you may be able to look at those. But now, in terms of section 24, I'll start with the objectives. Section 24 outlines the objectives that time and again, when we determine or redetermine municipal boundaries, we should be guided by the objective being to ensure that the localities that we create are enabling those municipalities to be able to discharge on their constitutional mandate. Those are broader objectives. We need to be sure that we are achieving a spatial integration. We need to be sure that we are enabling those communities to benefit out of the tax base towards which they contribute. For example, if people are spending most of their life in a particular area, they commute there every day to work, they spend their money there, that is the tax base within which they should find themselves when boundaries are, in the long run drawn. So that is what it refers to by an inclusive tax base. And those are the objectives. They are a guiding pole that says whenever we create a municipality, you must make sure that these are the objectives that will be realized. They are long-term, but they should be guiding whatever we do. Now, coming to the factors that we take into consideration, you'll realize that they are, on your fact sheet, there will be about 12 factors that should be considered. And I'll not talk to all of those. You can read for yourself, but you can see that the interdependence of people, economies, and communities in there, referring to issues like the transport network, the commuting patterns of these people, where do they work, where are they employed, where do they spend their money, the industrial and commercial linkages, for example. Issues of spatial and settlement integration, unfragmented settlements, that's what we should strive to achieve. Issues like financial viability, that is an area where you would test the capacity of a municipality to be able to generate revenue, own revenue, to finance their activities, or are they going to just become other municipalities like others that are fully dependent on grants? We know that municipalities are dependent on grants, but to varying degrees, but there are those that are almost 100% dependent on grants. So those are some of the criteria. The last one there being the rationalization of the total number of municipalities to in the long run, achieve a more efficient units or localities that we call municipalities. So those are the criteria, and as you would see, the Act says all of those must be taken into consideration. So those are the criteria that guide how the board would conduct itself, and as well as towards decision making as to whether this will become a viable municipality or not. So that would be the criteria, and this is about municipal outer boundaries. There are other criteria that are contained in Schedule 1 of the Municipal Structures Act, which are the criteria for wards. But before I talk to the criteria for ward delimitation, Section 2 of the Municipal Structures Act, you should be having it there as well. There is a shorter version, not 12 criteria, but a fewer. Those are the criteria that should guide us when determining whether a locality can qualify as a metro or Category A municipality or not. So you can see the criteria for municipalities in 24 and 25 of a Municipal Demarcation Act, but the criteria for a metro are contained there, as you can see in Section 2 of the Municipal Structures Act. And lastly, there are criteria as well when we delimit wards, and those are contained in Schedule 1 of the Municipal Structures Act. And for those in terms of ward delimitation, the key being making sure that we are within the norm. It's not the board that decides how big a ward should be or how a ward should look like. Those criteria guide how a ward should look like. There is some leeway given to the board. For example, you can go above the norm by 15% or below the norm by 15%, and not anything beyond that. But that gives you the parameters that guide us when we delimit wards. You realize that there are those where we are, trying as far as possible to accommodate communities, so that communities that regard themselves as one are kept as one. But that is not a rule. It's where possible, because what is mostly a guiding factor would be the norm. But where possible, try to accommodate communities that regard themselves as one. And you realize that in terms of the wards, the criteria are set out in such a manner that we should not depart from our basis for wards being to facilitate a local government election. So those are the criteria. I think you can see they are contained in 3 separate pieces referring to sections of the legislation.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is in the interpretation of the criteria that you find contestations, and I will hand over to you for questions. Please identify yourself if you need any clarification on that matter. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Director. My name is Tambe Gabara, working for Government Online News Agency, Senior Inspector Government Communications. Chair, when you go to areas like Malamle, do you perhaps explain to those who are leading the communities about the importance of social cohesion? My question is influenced by the fact that we have noticed that, more especially when the people there, when they are protesting, they display some of the placards which perpetuate tribalism. Like, you will see an instance where residents are displaying a placard which says, we don't want people who, we don't want to hear Ndra here, meaning referring to the vendor speaking people. Do you perhaps maybe have an opportunity to explain to people, residents, that about the importance of social cohesion?
Okay. Well,
Any other questions? Thank you. Chairperson.
I'll answer that question in relation to what I just presented, being the criteria. Social cohesion happens to be one of the criteria, because we need to create cohesive societies. We need to ensure a spatial integration. It features more than once across the criteria that we had mentioned. So indeed, people who apply are cautioned about the criteria that will guide how the board will be able to evaluate their proposal. And that becomes one of the central themes that runs through the criteria.
Thank you. There being no other questions, can we move to session 3, ward delimitation process?
Now, I'll just run through this one quickly. As you know, every 5 years, before any local government election can take place, the board must delimit wards in those municipalities that qualify to have wards. And wards are nothing but geopolitical spaces within which the citizens will be able to vote for representatives of their choice, the people who will be able to present their needs to government. It's actually where there is the root of the linkage or interaction between society and government. It is also a space where all government programs find spatial expression that is within a ward, and the Municipal Demarcation Board is tasked with the responsibility to define that space, which we call a ward. Now, you would know that we're preparing towards local government elections, and ever since the board closed the process of outer boundary determination end of 2013, we had embarked on a process towards preparation for ward delimitation. We met with stakeholders from as early as April 2014, meeting with stakeholders, you'd imagine a portfolio committee on local government, traditional leaders, national house and provincial houses, municipalities, SALGA, and many other structures, political parties as well. We had met with them outlining how this process is going to be unfolding, and of course inviting their inputs. We know that these are people representing specific constituencies on the ground, and as we were about to embark on this process, we wanted to get some learnings from them. What do you think didn't go right in the previous ward delimitation process that happened some 4 years back? so that we are able to inform our readiness and as we embark on a new process of ward delimitation. As you would know, the board does not decide how many wards that should be there. What precedes ward delimitation is a formula that is published by the minister. In terms of the Act, a Minister of Cooperative Governance must publish a formula, which formula would be utilized by MECs to determine the number of councillors. Meaning that if there's no formula, the board cannot even initiate a process of delimiting wards. Now, the formula gets published, which was done this time around in September by the minister, and thereafter, MECs for each province used that formula, applied that formula to determine the number of councillors. Now, the Act, Municipal Structures Act, further indicates that once the number of councillors is determined, half of those, that is 50% of those councillors, would be ward councillors. Others are peer councillors, but 50% would be ward councillors. Meaning that if in a particular area the formula had determined that there are going to be 100 councillors, we would know that 50 of those would be ward councillors. And that then means there must be 50 wards delimited. So it's a process that continues in that sequence. Now, with that having happened, formula published, MECs determined number of councillors, therefore we then knew how many wards were going to be created. Now we get guided by the criteria that are contained in your fact sheet, Schedule 1 of the Municipal Structures Act, guiding what criteria should guide us as we delimit wards. It's also a process that should be very consultative. You might be aware that we launched this process on the 9th of December in KZN, effectively ushering in a process that indicates we had been interacting with stakeholders, but now that we are ready and we have this formula published, we have a number of councillors, as well as knowing how many wards are going to be there, then we were launching the program to invite the public to a process we were going to start now in January. And indeed, that process has started. The team from the board is all over the country, meeting with the communities, explaining to them how the makeup or the outlook of the wards would be like in their specific municipalities. So that is a process that should be very consultative and involved with us, where we involve our citizens on the ground, because they are the ones who should know. If they were to remain in ward that's called Ward 1, that's even better. But if by any chance, due to the growth in the number of voters registered, it happens that there will be more wards, there could be a chance that some people who used to be in a particular ward, they would find themselves, I'm no longer in a ward called Ward 1, I'm in a ward that's called Ward 5, for example. Now, they need to know exactly how did that came about. They are the ones who should guide this process, even where you need to incorporate another village or another community into a particular area. They need to understand why. Okay, we couldn't meet the norm. Our number of registered voters was too low in these wards. Therefore, it didn't qualify as a ward if it's far lower than the norm. So we had to get other people, maybe add a village that wasn't in that particular ward, such that that ward should conform to the norm and not be an illegal ward. So it is them who should understand how it came about, and they are better positioned even to advise the board as to where can you get people that can be included into this ward to make sure that it conforms. So that is about ward delimitation. It's a process that we're busy with right now, and officials from the board are out there throughout the country on the ward delimitation process.
Thank you. Thank you. The ward delimitation process is a process that is always at the end contested. And I think the chairperson has clarified why we need to go that process in a consultative manner. Any questions? Please identify yourself in that process. Thank you. There being no questions, can we move to the last session, which is the most topical one, the Malamulele issue that we want to put into perspective, taking into consideration what we have, the chairperson has outlined now. Thank you, chairperson.
Okay, thanks. Moving on, you'd realize in conducting our mandate, we are guided by piece of legislation purely, but we do put society at the heart of our work. There is a commitment by the board to produce boundaries that are popular, beyond reproach, and contribute towards a responsible spatial configuration in partnership with all stakeholders that we engage with. Now, in terms of Malamulele, on Thursday, the 29th of January 2015, the board met to deliberate on the findings of the study that was commissioned following a board resolution of May 2014 to determine whether the proposal to have a new municipality for Malamulele, separate from Thulamela municipality, does meet the objectives and factors jointly referred to as criteria as laid out in Section 24 and 25 of the Municipal Demarcation Act. The Act provides that the demarcation objectives and all the factors must be taken into account when determining municipal boundaries. Those criteria include spatial integration, inclusive tax base, patterns of human settlement, commuting and transport movement, commercial and industrial linkages, cohesive and integrated and unfragmented areas, financial viability, the need to rationalize the total number of municipalities, just amongst others. Another key determinant had been the Malamulele proposal itself, which, given its spatial context, was limited to the splitting of Thulamela municipality into two. The outcome of the study has to be understood as a product of these major inputs. From the onset, the board had indicated in writing that commissioning of the study did not constitute a reopening of the outer boundary determination process. It was further indicated that if the study concludes that the envisaged municipality is feasible, further legal processes to conclude the redetermination process and establish a municipality would be embarked upon after the 2016 local government elections. Whereas, if the study was to indicate that the proposed standalone municipality for Malamulele were not feasible, all stakeholders would accordingly abide by such an outcome. A study of this nature takes time, considering that all the criteria as stipulated in the Act have to be considered. It has therefore been necessary to take the length of time in order to ensure that all processes have been properly followed and the law efficiently applied. It has not been the intention of the board to keep the people of Malamulele waiting for longer than was initially anticipated. After much consideration and deliberation, the board came to a conclusion that the proposed standalone municipality for Malamulele is not consistent with the demarcation criteria and therefore not viable. This decision has been communicated to the Malamulele Demarcation Task Team on behalf of the community, the Limpopo Provincial Administration, as well as the Ministry of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. All parties have been given hard copies of the report, and the report is available on our website. Some of you might be aware already of that and could have downloaded it. In addition to the demarcation issues that were the center of the report, the study also highlighted other areas that require urgent and focused attention of government first and foremost, and other key stakeholders in the local government sector. It also confirms that the Malamulele area within the Thulamela municipality lags behind with service that is the service backlog, as compared to the remainder of the Thulamela municipality. This service delivery and social cohesion issues raised have been brought to the attention of the relevant institutions, who will leverage other instruments outside the demarcation process to investigate and have this addressed. Having addressed myself to the study, I need to indicate that there is a new opportunity for the Malamulele community that presents itself in the form of a proposal received from the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, a proposal that seeks to have the outer boundaries redetermination process reopened for some municipalities across the country, to have their boundaries reconfigured before the local government elections in 2016. Now, that proposal is in terms of the program called Back to Basics, which program seeks to improve the efficiency of local government in order to make it responsive and relevant in their mandate of service delivery for our people. Amongst other municipalities in Limpopo, all local municipalities in Wembe, including Thulamela, are affected by this proposal. Now, in considering the minister's proposal, the board will embark on a process starting with publication of the Section 26 notices during the first and second week of February 2015. With benefit from the study, the Malamulele community is better positioned to make meaningful contributions in the process towards crafting sustainable, integrated, and cohesive municipalities in Wembe. The community is urged to actively engage in this process. In conclusion, the board regards Malamulele to have been a seminal case or a national case study from which major lessons in the second decade of our democracy can be learned. Those lessons from this lengthy and painful process have become an investment in the shaping of a democratic and developmental local government. The Municipal Demarcation Board is committed to sustain a developmental approach to address the historical fragmented and inadequate spatial planning in partnership with all stakeholders. The demarcation process supports integrated development planning, greater involvement of communities in local level consultation initiatives, and a partnership approach towards efforts to deepen democracy and grow local economies. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will then allow questions on the Malamulele issue, as well as general questions, having heard the context of the work of the Municipal Demarcation Board. Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
Chair, my name is Neo Makwiti from SABC Radio News. I'm very much interested in your last comment on the issue of Malamulele. Yes, I'm very much aware that you have said the second week of February we'll be starting with the process in terms of communications. When is the actual engagement with the communities concerned is going to take place? And the second, as a follow-up, would this proposal, in terms of what we have seen happening in the past 2-3 weeks, reduce the level of tension and emotions that has teared apart the Limpopo area?
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Paul from ANC. Chair, I just want to ask, do you think maybe perhaps people of Malamulele can believe that they've got a chance to have their own municipality in the future?
Thank you. I will take another question if there's any. Yes, sir, at the back.
Paul from Demarcation. We spoke at length with the chairperson when I was working on the story, and we were able to clarify some of the issues. But in light of the study, what are the odds? What is the possibility for Malamulele people to have their boundaries reconsidered?
Thank you. Over to you, Chairperson.
Okay, thanks. Let me start with Neo's questions on when do we start engaging with the people. The publication that's referred to, it's in terms of the Act, Section 26 of the Municipal Demarcation Act. This section effectively indicates that a notice that we're giving out there is to the public to say the board received a proposal and the board intends to embark on a process to consider this proposal. Please submit your written representations, your views, your opinions. So that is the first line of interaction with communities. We will receive the inputs based on the proposal, based on the minister's proposal as a first line of entry into the process. And that has to happen within a time frame, 21 days after the publication shall have appeared. So within those 21 days, we will be receiving written submissions, views, opinions, and that will guide how the process unfolds. That might require that we actually physically go and conduct meetings in specific areas, as an example. That may require as well that we perhaps even go into further studies over and above the proposal that we received from the minister. We may go into further studies ourselves as we go on with this process. But the first line being Section 26, where we will start by receiving inputs, comments, and views from the public. That is what a Section 26 notice is about. Now, Mpo's second question was, and maybe let me clarify that this engagement is not only with Malamulele people. In the Vembe district, all municipalities are affected. So it's going to be a dialogue with all the residents of Vembe district about crafting more sustainable municipalities in their area. And the Malamulele people happen to be members of that very same community.
With the proposed engagement diffuse the situation?
Whether this proposed engagement will diffuse the tension depends on the community through their leadership to understand what it entails. And I think largely, as the board, we wish people could be able to read and understand this report, other than to perhaps just criticize it without, on the basis of a final outcome, without going through the work as it was carried out by the document. Because any person who is armed with this report, like the Malamulele people should be, they would then be put in a better position. They have an unfair advantage, actually, as opposed to the rest of the Vembe people, to understand what is entailed in a proposal to have your own municipality. And that places them at an advantage in terms of the inputs that they will make into the process. And maybe touching on your question, it also would say to them, if they would read this report, they will know that if they repeat their proposal, bring it back as it was, it will still not meet the criteria. Nothing would have changed. Therefore, if you come back with the same proposal, there's no way you can expect a different outcome. So the report, studying it would help them a lot, because you might have picked up when I was talking about this report, I said the input that informed this outcome had been the criteria, but also the proposal that came from Malamulele. They drew that boundary. They came and said, we want ourselves to be this community, and confined themselves to splitting the Thulamela municipality into two. So the manner in which they had confined themselves produced this outcome that shows this entity is not compliant with the legislation. So I think they then would take advantage of this process to know better how an integrated municipality should look like, if you need to be able to fall in line with the broader objectives for municipalities in this country, what are the factors that contribute towards that? But unfortunately, if there's a pain moment where you get an outcome that you don't want, but there should be a second stage of then engaging with the report to start seeing, but what are the flaws, what are the problems in my report, which will help them move into a second process better informed and at an advantage, sort of.
Possible redetermination of Madam Lene boundary, taking into consideration the proposal.
See, the possible redetermination, I think I touched on it a little bit. The possible redetermination, yes, the window has opened now, but the possible redetermination is when you come up with an entity that will meet the requirements of the legislation. That is the only entities that would lead to a positive determination by the board to establish. It has to be guided by the criteria. And indeed, within this window, if good proposals are coming up, proposals of entities that should become municipalities in Wembe that meet the requirements of the Act, therefore they would find themselves alongside other citizens of Wembe having very viable municipalities.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Any other general questions with regards to the Municipal Demarcation Board, the work it does outside, and any other issue? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I hear you say that there are criteria on deciding to give to award a municipality. But I would like to understand what are the central points that you use to decide to give municipality. I understand you're talking about criteria and everything, but maybe perhaps if you can give me a concise answer as to say, these are the central point that we use to decide when we award the municipality.
Thank you, sir.
Chair, now again, just a repeat. I just want the clarity-seeking question. You mentioned the fact that you are currently now working on finalization of the local government election next year. You know, with your process of determining the ward structure towards the next year's election, local government election, how far are you, and when would we get a final kind of report saying this is the boundaries that we're going to have as we enter the 2016 elections?
Thank you, sir. Question over there.
Molimo from SABC TV News. Still on that one, is there, or are there any plans for the board to further merge municipalities in the next few months, especially ahead of the local government elections, and how many, and what would be the reasons for that?
I just add one question.
Please.
Yeah, I just want to know why do we still have so many municipalities still resembling maybe apartheid special boundaries?
Thank you. Over to you, Chairperson.
Okay, thanks. Let me start with the first and last. I'll take to both your questions. You see, the law, as I indicated, and I try to highlight that, says all criteria are central. It doesn't say I'll elevate one and somebody would say, but I qualify in terms of this one. Forget about the others. We need to make sure that an entity that would be considered a municipality should have a balance of these factors. So all the criteria get tested. Now, you asking why do we still have some municipalities that still resemble the apartheid features? perhaps some people had said, why do we have other municipalities that are not viable, and yet you deny Madam Mulelo on the basis of unviability? See, the municipal, the determination and redetermination of boundaries is not a fixed process. It's an ongoing process. And as when I started talking about this, I said the board has been in the forefront of spatial transformation in the country, having reduced municipalities from this number to this number. And in every cycle, you'd have seen that the numbers had been changing. It's not only reducing as if reducing is the core thing. Yes, reducing is still part of the criteria because we need to make sure that there's a rationalization, but also the process of continually reviewing our work to see whether municipalities that had been created are still sustainable. Are there no factors that inform change such that something that could have been viable in 2000 is no longer viable today? But also as to whether indeed are there no other municipalities that still have some features that where you can be able to say, if you were to put them to this test today, they wouldn't make that test. It's a continuous process. We keep improving this process. We keep looking, and it's a forward and backwards process. As we move forward to redetermine and determine, we keep looking as to whether indeed those that exist are still in line with this criteria and factors. So that is an ongoing process. That's how I can explain it.
How far are we on the word delimitation?
The word delimitation process, in terms of our initial plan, was supposed to end in August. But for those municipalities that are not affected by the minister's proposal, that deadline will still be met. But now that we're having a proposal from the minister regarding certain municipalities whose outer boundaries need to be reviewed, that will affect the ward delimitation process, because we would have to suspend the ward delimitation process to deal with the outer boundaries first. Because as you know, wards are sort of inner boundaries. They cannot happen unless the outer boundary is fixed. So we'll have to go into this process that I said we are embarking upon, starting with Section 26 notices. And once we had done all that and reached final determinations, that's only then that we'll start with the ward delimitation process. And then it might drag in a few months, say 2 to 3 months after the initially planned deadline of August 2015. That is the only time we will be able to hand over to the IEC for them to prepare for local government elections. But as I said, the ones that are not affected by the minister's proposal will still be able to meet the August deadline for handing over to the IEC.
Further merging of municipalities.
On the further merging, we don't have an answer for that. We have a proposal right now from the minister that proposes some measures in other areas, that proposes some recategorization in other areas. I said we are initiating a process, starting with a public consultation. Ultimately, all those will culminate in us testing them against the criteria. And it's only then that we will know how many measures would take place, how many recategorization will take place, and therefore, by how many would the municipalities be reduced if there would be any reduction. So it's not possible to give an answer. The minister's proposal is just a proposal. It's going to go through the mill and be tested against the criteria. Only then shall we know how many, whether measures will take place, recategorizations, and therefore, if any reductions, how many municipalities would disappear.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Any further questions?
Maybe in point of clarity, I just want to know, you said there were delays when you were addressing us. So I just want to understand whether there were any maybe sabotage or what constitute maybe for you to delay the release of the proposal. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, Chairperson.
I alluded to the delays in the process of the study, not in the release. It was the study period that took longer than initially was anticipated. When you start when you conduct a study of this nature, it's a social research. You would interview people. You would schedule to meet with provincial administration of Limpopo. You'll schedule to meet with the traditional leaders, House of Traditional Leaders. You'll schedule to meet with the community itself, schedule to meet with the affected municipalities. Now, when you conduct research, you'd know that sometimes, particularly if it's social research, your time frames are dictated to by the availability of those people. Sometimes you have an appointment to meet with somebody next week, and suddenly they tell you their programs have changed and they're no longer available to meet with you. If you have to study financial models, if you want to model finances for a proposed municipality, you have to get data from the existing municipality and delineate it to say, okay, this is the total budget for Thulamela. This is a total revenue generation for Thulamela. But now if I have to compute to get a picture as to how Malamulele alone would look like if it's a standalone municipality, you have to aggregate that out of the Thulamela and try to do that. So that can be a desktop study. You have to go in there, work with the finance people, get the finance document, similarly with the province. And you have to study documentation. You have to be sure that you understand the spatial development framework of the province of Limpopo itself, its growth and development plan. You have to understand the spatial development framework of those municipalities. So it wasn't the release of the report that was delayed. It was the study itself, from start to conclusion. Immediately it was concluded, the board set to take a decision and convey the outcome. There was no delay once the study was done, but the period of conducting the study had taken much longer, given its dynamics and the fact that you were testing just so many criteria.
One more question there. Thank you.
Chair, is it likely that maybe in my district,
You should have declared those interests up front.
are we likely to have maybe to remain with 3 or local municipalities, or I don't know, after this new proposal?
We also don't know. It depends on the engagements that are going to take place out there, the inputs that are going to come, but we need to have very viable municipalities. As to how many, we don't know.
So for now, they are not viable.
For now, yes, there are those that are not viable. Like Mutali.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is very, very clear from the discussion we've had that the process of development and rationalization is dynamic, and it is not a destination we can arrive at and stop. It needs to be a continual process. Even the most developed countries in the world are still going through the same process. It is also very important that we have active citizenry that participates and influences the decisions that are going to affect them. In that, if there are no further questions, I think we can declare this briefing session closed, and we have our networking session. Thank you.